Hello, I'm Katrina Holt, and I am the designer of the Edelweiss Patterns line of sewing patterns. Today, I'm going to show you step by step how to sew a 1950s dress from start to finish. This is perfect for beginners. It is very simple and basic. I would not recommend this being your first ever project. For your success, I would rather you have made an apron before, maybe a basic blouse, maybe a super simple skirt. But that being said, if you are determined and you're good at learning as you go along, you can probably do this as your first project. So for this project, we are going to be using 2 bodice pieces from my 1950s sister's dress pattern. Very, very simple, basic sleeveless back, basic sleeveless front with just 1 dart, and then the skirt is going to be 2 very simple rectangles. I will have everything that you need listed in the description down below. So without further ado, let's start sewing. So you want to pre-shrink your fabric. You'll do this by washing and drying it. And there are instructions in the description box below that tell you how much fabric you will need. And then the next thing you want to do is figure out which size to cut out from the pattern. So using your measuring tape, you're going to want to take your measurements, and you will notice that pattern sizes and off-the-rack sizes do not match up. For this dress, you really only need to take your bust and waist measurement because the hips are really irrelevant. A gathered skirt will be so full. If you have any questions, I highly recommend checking out my most recent video on sizing, and then you will want to cut out pattern piece number 5, which is the bodice front, and pattern piece number 6 from the pattern. So here is the paper copy of the pattern. You can also get the digital version that you print at home and tape together like you see here on the screen. The digital ones are available worldwide. The paper patterns only ship in the United States right now. Now, if you're not familiar with what a selvage is, you're going to see these funny little edges at the end of the fabric. You want to fold the fabric so that the 2 selvages are together. So the only part of the pattern you need to pay any attention to is the top left corner here. You see the folds on the left and the selvages are on the right, and that is exactly what you're seeing with the fabric. Now the bodice front is going to be laid out on the fold, and then the bodice back goes next to it. So you want to do that for your lining fabric and your fashion fabric. Now note, if you have 45-inch fabric, you're going to need to stagger your 2 pieces because the sewing pattern itself was made for 60-inch. Next, we're going to cut out our skirt, and this is a 60-inch wide piece of fabric. You can see the selvages are lined up together. Now we want it to be 45 inches wide by 32 inches long. So since the fabric is folded in 2, we're cutting it at 22.5 because 22.5 times 2 will be 45. And we're just going to use that yardstick as our guide until we hit the 32-inch mark. And then we will cut a second panel so that we have both pieces we need for the skirt. Okay, now this is what it will look like if you're cutting from a 45-inch wide piece of fabric. So my lining is 45 inches wide. So in that case, I'm simply measuring up the 32 inches of length from the bottom. In this case, I do not need to cut off the 22.5 that you saw the first time because the total width of this fabric is already 45 inches. So you only need to cut the length. And now that we have both pieces of the skirt cut out, we are moving on to the bodice. So I am flat lining the bodice pieces. So these are the 2 bodice back pieces. You can see I'm putting the lining on the wrong side of the fashion fabric. Flat lining is a much simpler technique than regular lining is, and that's why I've chosen that for this project, because I want it to be very easy for you guys. So you can see we're just making sure that the lining is laying flat, that there are no wrinkles, and then we're pinning that in place. The reason for this is because we're going to stitch them around the exterior of the pieces to essentially create one piece. Now, the exact same thing I have done for the bodice front. You can see there's the right side of the fabric, and the lining is currently pinned to the inside or the wrong side of the fashion fabric. So as the instructions show, you want to start by stay stitching the neckline. Because the neckline is kind of cut on the round, it needs stabilization. So I'm going to be stitching starting here right about half an inch. That's what I was just showing on the sewing machine. And only for the neckline, we need to start at the shoulder and stitch around to the center. On the bodice back pieces, this is pretty simple because that's really the width of the garment. That's really the width of the piece anyhow. And then once you've done that, stay stitching around the neckline. We are just going to do straight stitching all the way down the back, across and up the armhole until we reach where we started doing the stay stitching. And by the way, the fingernail polish that I am wearing has the most perfect name. This is an Essie polish that's one of the 9 free. I really have been trying to be more organic, all natural lately, so it's free of like, I think 7 or 9 of those chemicals that you're not really supposed to use if you can help it. Anyhow, the color is called Fairy Tailor, which is really hilarious because a tailor obviously would sew, and so this has been sort of my go-to color for a little while. I will link it below for you guys. Okay, so we are now coming up very shortly here to where we started the stay stitching. And by the way, what we have done everywhere except for the neckline on this piece is called basting instead of stay stitching, but just a technicality, you don't have to memorize it. And then we are snipping those threads. So I'm going to show the process for the bodice front sped up a bit because I've just demonstrated in real time exactly how to do this. So we're starting again at the shoulder of the neckline and moving to the center front. And then we're going to turn the garment around and we're going to do the same thing following that curve. And again, this just helps the neckline to not get stretched out because until certain parts of a garment are stitched, they are liable to get kind of misshapen. So now the neckline is done, and now we can just focus on basting the remainder of the pattern piece. Okay, so this is the first of many, many times you're going to see me pull out my iron and steam something. I cannot tell you how important it is to do this step and to not skip it. It's going to make all the difference in the world in the finished look of your garment. And it's going to help it look professional instead of like, oh, you know, I made this at home. Not that we don't want them to know that we sew, but we don't want it to be obvious, you know, that it's not professionally made. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is cut out the darts. Now, there are many different ways to mark the darts on your fabric. I am going to show you maybe the easiest way, we're just going to cut the entire dart out of the pattern piece itself. And then once we have that done, we want to match up the center front and the rest of the fabric. And once we have it in place, I am putting one pin with the very top of the glass head, that little circular round part, right where the dart needs to stop, right up there at the tip of it. And then we're just doing pins right along the edge where that dart is on the pattern piece. And then we want to flip it over and repeat the process on the other side. So we now want to fold the dart. And you want to remove the pins from the back side and just have one layer of pins on the front. And just make sure that final pin goes exactly back where you placed it at first. So there you have it. Now we have both the darts pinned. Darts are really good for shaping. In the bodice, obviously when you're sewing for a female, for an adult woman, you need to have some sort of shaping in the bust area. Some patterns call for princess seams. This one has darts. And this is a pretty basic bodice because it only has one dart. So you want to start at the wide edge of the dart. You're going to put your needle down and backstitch. And then slowly work your way towards the point, and just make sure to remove the pins as you go and take your time. And then watch that you go just exactly where the tip of the dart was marked with your pin. You can either backstitch or you can just kind of sew off the edge of the fabric for a little bit and clip those threads. And now what I'm doing is I'm trimming off the excess, so we don't need all that extra fabric now that our darts are stitched. This will eliminate bulk, and reducing bulk really helps the garment to fit better and to have a more professional finish. Now, it's optional, but definitely recommended to have what's called a tailor's ham. This is an item that has some roundness to it, and so it's going to help press those darts better in just a minute. So I have my iron set to cotton setting, which is pretty high, and I'm using my steam button to really get some good steam in there. Once we've done that for about 10 to 20 seconds, you want to put your garment over the tailor's ham. If you don't have the tailor's ham, just do this flat on the ironing board. And then finger press, so open up the dart seam with your fingers, and then once that's done, go in with the iron and really apply some pressure and a lot of good steam. Steaming it, it's not about getting the wrinkles out like if you've only ever ironed a shirt before. When you're sewing a garment, using the steam function and the heat, it helps to meld all those threads together. So the threads from the thread you just used in your sewing machine, the threads from the fabric itself, it helps to kind of make it more one cohesive piece of fabric instead of just some fabric that's held together by stitches. So once I've pressed that open on the wrong side, the inside of the garment, I am pressing them on the outside. It gives a really nice clean look. And then finally, I am pressing the seam allowances of the dart to the outside of the fabric, so towards the side seam. So this is the first of many times in this project that we're going to use a zigzag stitch. If your sewing machine has an overlock stitch, which mine does, that's perfectly fine to use as well. The idea is that it's going to go back and forth over the edges of the raw material so that you don't end up with fraying fabric as the garment gets worn over the years. So you can see when the needle goes over to the right, it is essentially encasing those raw edges in the zigzag stitch. Okay, so we now have our 3 bodice pieces, and we are going to attach them first at the shoulder seams. So we're going to pin them together. And you notice that when we're stitching a garment together, we always do right sides together with this sort of construction. The only time really you would not have right sides together is if you're doing a French seam, but that's a little more advanced and we will not be doing that in this project. So when in doubt, right sides together, and we're just pinning that shoulder seam. So we always start at the neckline edge and move towards the armhole edge when we're sewing a shoulder seam. Make sure you backstitch at the end there. So once we have both shoulder seams finished, we're going to do something called grading, which is just trimming it down a teensy bit. Now keep in mind this is a 5/8 inch seam allowance, so you don't have that much to get rid of like you did with the dart. This is going to help reduce bulk because you'll just have less fabric that's extra inside your garment. So now we want to steam this really, really well. And then I'm doing something here that's called the 5-step pressing method. I will link to the article. It's a completely free article on my blog. It has step-by-step instructions. Essentially, you press the seam flat, so just in the same position it would be on the sewing machine. Then you press the seam open from the wrong side of the fabric. You press it open from the right side, which is what you just saw. And then we are pressing both the seam allowances towards the back. And then we will do that from the right side as well. And the before and after is enormous. I mean, it's absolutely huge. It seems like a small step, but if you could see this in person, it's just crisp and perfect and looks amazing. So now we're using that zigzag stitch that I showed you a minute ago, and we are finishing off the raw edges of those shoulder seams. Okay, so the next step, this is very exciting. It's going to start to look like a bodice. We are going to stitch it together at the side seams. The side seam runs from underneath your arm down to your waistline where the skirt will be attached. And by the way, I like to use the glass head pins, glass head dressmaker pins. They're very fine, and I find that they don't make as much of a mark on my fabric as some of the kinds you might just find at your local craft store. So this is, again, a 5/8 inch seam allowance. We're stitching the side seam here. And then back stitch and trim the threads. So once you have done that on both side seams, we're going to use the exact same process we did on the shoulder seam. So again, just grading it down, removing a tiny, tiny little piece of fabric there. And one of the reasons it's called grading is because you're technically supposed to hold the scissor blades at a slight angle so that essentially one of those edges of the seam allowance will be a tiny bit longer than the other one, thereby eliminating some of the bulk. So again, I'm using the 5-step pressing method. Press it flat, press it open from the wrong side, press it open from the right side, press the seam allowances toward the back from the wrong side, and then do the same thing from the right side. I don't expect you to memorize this, by the way. It takes a little while to get the hang of it. When in doubt, press your seams. And you will see this in the description down below, but you can use pretty much any cotton fabric that's a cotton solid or a cotton broadcloth, or it might be called a quilter cotton. You can find these at your local quilt shops. You can also find them online. I like to see my fabrics in person most of the time. This one that I'm actually using today is a little bit of a poly blend. It's cotton polyester, and it comes from Fabric Wholesale Direct. This one is a little bit more sheer than some of the cottons you're going to find at your local fabric store, which is why lining is helpful. But even if your fabric is not a little bit sheer, you still want to use a cotton lining because your bodice will not have the necessary structure otherwise. Okay, so next we're going to grab our bias binding. Bias binding is much wider than it looks, and it is folded a number of times to create a product that makes it very easy to finish a raw edge. So because this was folded over the package, I am just steaming those little divots out. And so we're going to bind our neckline with the bias binding. So we want to take a measurement that just lets us know how long to cut it. I'm going all the way around the neckline here. So it looks like it's about 20 inches. And then I want to cut a little bit extra as well. It's better to be safe than sorry. Okay, so let's go ahead and open it up. So you see that center fold right in there? We want to put that center fold directly over the raw edge of the neckline. And don't worry, it's going to zoom in here. There we go. So the raw edge of the neckline is being sandwiched in between the two folds of the bias binding. And then We're just pinning that in place. So now we need to bind the sleeves as well, and they're going to be just a teensy bit trickier. Once you take the measurement that you need for the sleeves, you want to cut it out a couple inches longer because we need to fold over the raw edges. So we just tucked under the raw edge, and we're starting at the side seam on the armhole, and we're going to pin in place around to the other side. The reason why we did not fold under the raw edges on the neckline edge is because that is going to be finished when we put the zipper in. And then when we come to the end here, we want to snip off any extra bias binding so that we get it at just the right length. You want to leave just enough that we can fold it under and have it match up with the other side where we started underneath the arm at the side seam and pin it in place. So let's start with the neckline first. You just want to stitch very close to the end of the bias binding. We're stitching through all the layers right now. We're stitching through both layers of the bias binding and also through the bodice. And then we'll get to the end and backstitch and clip those threads. Now, in order to do the armholes, we need to take off a part of our machine. This is called free arm sewing. In your machine instructions, it should show you how to take that part off to give you an easier time. I'm slipping the armhole straight over the edge here. And we're going to use the same process, but just be really careful when you're starting and finishing to make sure the raw edges of the bias binding stay folded where we pinned them. And then you will repeat this process on the other armhole as well. Okay, there we go. So you want to press that really well. You want to press both armholes and also the neckline. And then this is what the bodice looks like when it is on a dress form. Very, very exciting. You can start to see it taking shape. You can see it looks really nice because everything is pressed. Last thing you want to do is finish all the raw edges. You can do this just in one fell swoop. Start at one neckline edge, go down the back where the zipper will be, go all the way around the bottom edge and then back up where the zipper will be on the other side. So that is where we're leaving off for this week, and next time we will work on the skirt.